In 1978, a letter arrives in Israel. It sparks a modern exodus.
And one of them somehow managed to send a letter to Israel saying, we are here in Sudan, we are stranded, we need your help, help us.
The plea comes from an unlikely source. Fleeing famine, civil war and religious persecution in their homeland, a desperate cry for help reveals a lost community of Jews in Ethiopia.
We walked for more than 3 weeks in order to get to Sudan.
The Ethiopian Jews claim to be one of the original 12 tribes of Israel, lost for 2,000 years in Africa.
When the Israelis decided that the Ethiopians were indeed Jews, one of the 12 lost tribes of Israel, they realized that they're going to have to smuggle 20,000 people out of East Africa, a region almost universally hostile to Israel. It was an almost impossible task.
Israel assembles a team to work undercover, outwit dictators, and overcome a civil war to rescue the lost tribe.
I was on my way in a helicopter when the pilot told me that he had a message from Jerusalem saying that he should do a U-turn and go straight to Jerusalem. The Prime Minister wants to see you.
This is the story of how a British businessman, a Mossad spy, and a seasoned diplomat risked everything to save the forgotten Jews. For 2,000 years, Jews had lived in Ethiopia.
In the mid-70s, there was a revolution in Ethiopia and civil war, and the Jews, many of them fled to Sudan.
Having escaped civil war in their homeland, the Jews are stuck in appalling refugee camps. In Sudan, their religion makes life even harder.
You couldn't say that you are a Jew. Otherwise, they would get, afraid of you. My sister, they burned her clothes that were hung on the rope.
News of their desperate plight reaches Israel.
And one of them somehow managed to send a letter to Israel saying, we are here in Sudan, we are stranded, we need your help, help us.
Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin decides to act.
Begin was himself a refugee. He had fled from the Nazis in Poland during the Second World War, leaving his family, unfortunately, to suffer their fate in the Holocaust. And since then, he'd become convinced that Israel must do everything it can to help Jews when they're in trouble. So when this letter turns up, he knows he must do everything he can to save the Ethiopian Jews.
Begin turns to his secret service, the Mossad.
The Prime Minister, he called the chief of the Mossad, and he told him, we have this news about Jews in Sudan, bring me the Jews of Ethiopia out of Sudan. Now, how do you take them out? Because Sudan is an Arab country, enemy, member of the Arab League.
With official relations between Israel and Sudan blocked, Mossad need a way to work covertly. They approach a then little-known Manchester businessman. He receives a phone call he never expected.
When I received the telephone call, my secretary was given 15 minutes to them. When I heard the story, I canceled my appointment. And we discussed. They wanted me to involve because of my trade on cotton.
David is an unlikely savior of the Ethiopian Jews. At 13, he had left school to become a market trader in his native Iran. 5 years later, in search of his fortune, he moved to Manchester, setting up a series of successful textile companies.
The Israelis approached David Alliance because he was a successful international businessman with good contacts in the Sudan. This enabled him to set up an office in Khartoum, and it's from that office that the Mossad agents were able to plan their rescue operation.
Using David's office to travel in and out of Sudan, Mossad discover a perfect base close to the refugee camps to carry out the evacuation. Gad Shimron is recruited to help run it.
I went down to Sudan as a member of the operating team of the new holiday village, Arus, 40 kilometers from Port Sudan. it allowed you to go around the country and to drive to Port Sudan and bring tourists and go out at night and day, whenever you want actually, with your rubber boats, because you're bringing tourists to the unique diving spots of Sudan.
Gad and his team create a plan. They will pick up Jewish refugees at confidential meeting points, rendezvous with the Israeli Navy offshore, and then escort the Jews to Israel.
We had what we called the committee members. Committee members were young Jewish boys in the camps who were our contact liaison people. In case we said, tomorrow, 20 hours or 8 p.m., 200 people at the quarry 10 kilometers south of the refugee camp. And we would come with our trucks, pick them up, drive through the police control and army control. Usually we have done it smoothly by bribing our way through.
In the 1980s, relations between Israel and Sudan were tense. The Sudanese have strong ties with their Arab neighbors. Rumors of Jewish refugees leaving for Israel alert the Sudanese to a potential Mossad plot. They shut the borders to Ethiopian Jews. The rescue now hinges on whether the Israelis can find a way to reopen the border.
What they needed was a trusted middleman with good business contacts and enough political clout to influence senior Sudanese officials. There was only really one candidate.
At that point, I was asked again to go in and help, which I did.
Again, David needs to keep his real motives hidden for the ministers to meet him. Once more, he uses his Sudan office and arrives under the pretense of a trade mission.
It was in 1984 when I went to Sudan, and the aim was to buy cotton, and at the same time, through that, to try and help to bring the Jews out.
The ministers he meets are unwilling to open the border or allow any Israeli activity, until David comes across an official who studied in his adopted city of Manchester.
He gave a cocktail party that night, and another gathering the next day, and I met some people who were able to help me to open the door again for the Ethiopian to move, which was very satisfying.
David is introduced to several influential ministers. They are persuaded by his requests and reopen the borders. News spreads in Ethiopia that the escape route to Israel is open again. Increasing numbers begin to make the hazardous journey.
We left the village at night because we were escaping from the authorities in Ethiopia. It's about 800 kilometers. We walked for more than 3 weeks in order to get to Sudan.
There are many dangers on the road.
There were robbers stopping us and asking for money. Otherwise they will kill us, and we were in the middle of nowhere.
In Sudan, they are put in temporary camps, rife with disease.
We realized that we're going to stay in that desert, live in tents for many months, maybe years.
14,000 Jews leave their homes in Ethiopia. Many do not complete the journey, and thousands succumb to epidemics in the camps. Around 6,000 people die or disappear.
They say that there is no family that got in Sudan and didn't lose one of her members.
To get the Jews out of Sudan, Gad and his Mossad team need a new plan that bypasses the heavily armed Sudanese coast.
So why not to land Israeli Air Force C-130 transport airplanes in the desert and bring in the Jews and fly them directly to Israel? Sounds crazy. We tried it. It worked once and twice.
At this stage, the Jews were being smuggled out in relatively small numbers every couple of weeks on military C-130 transport planes. It was a tried and tested method that had been used a few years earlier to rescue Israeli hostages from Entebbe in Uganda. But when word spread around the world that a terrible natural disaster had hit the region, they realized they're going to have to speed things up. They're going to need bigger planes.
In a year, 1 million people die from one of the worst famines to blight Africa.
It was now a race against time to save the Jews before they died of hunger. And to do this, Israel asked the United States to intervene. After secret talks with the president, Nimeri, a deal was done. He will turn a blind eye as long as the operation is kept secret, not only from his Arab allies, but also for his own people. It's this that allowed the Israelis to begin to plan a mass airlift.
6,000 refugees are stranded in the camps and need to be airlifted to safety. Considered a modern exodus, this mission is named Operation Moses. The US, Israel, and Sudan put the final details together. The operation takes place in a total blackout. Sudan's allies cannot know it's assisting Israel. A Belgian aviation company fly via Europe.
The Jews were taken from the refugee camps in military convoys, actually. Because, I mean, the Sudanese soldiers didn't know. They thought those are refugees being evacuated to Europe. Were taken to Khartoum International Airport, flown to Europe, and from Europe straight to Israel. Sometimes, the airplane would only touch and go in Athens, change call number and continue to Israel. In a short period of 7 weeks, over 6,000 Jewish refugees were airlifted out of Sudan.
With a few days remaining before all the Jews in the camps can be evacuated, the story breaks.
The news was spread on the radio and the international radio and media and TV. And Nimeri, of course, had to say, "Oh, I didn't know, I stopped it." And that was the end of Operation Moses.